Hello, everyone. Good evening. So we called our meeting to order during our closed executive session so we can begin our meeting. And before we do, I'll just turn it over to Mr. Toscano to amend the record of our closed session. Mr. Toscano?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Some minor changes noted to the pre-printed agenda that was available. The board did not discuss for item number 8, the superintendent evaluation. That will be discussed during the second executive session. The board did not discuss item number 4, negotiations with the WWPSA. And the board did add one additional item, which is under number 7. It is specifically potential litigation regarding to the CMS construction project.
Thank you, Mr. Toscano. Okay, I will turn it over to our superintendent for some comments.
Good evening, everyone. Not a lot of comments tonight, but I just want to just recognize the unfolding situation in Texas this evening at Robb Elementary School, where a gunman killed 14 elementary students, one teacher, and critically injuring numerous other students and staff. And just that our thoughts and well wishes are with that community, and yet another senseless act of gun violence in our country. Wanted to just pause and recognize the families impacted this evening in the unfolding situation. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adderhold. So next on our agenda, we have a presentation tonight, the Equity Strategic Goal presentation. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Adderhold to introduce our guests.
Well, again, good evening again, everyone. So we're pleased this evening to present strategic goal number 4, our diversity, equity, inclusion goal. And today I'm joined by members of that team, our co-chairs and members of our administration that help facilitate that work. Just from a point of process, in the past, the district has adopted 3 strategic goals in 2018. Through that work, we have enacted and kept very much alive our strategic plan. February of 21, the board adopted strategic goal number 4, which was a specific goal placing explicit focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. From that, following a very similar pattern of our other goals, co-chairs were named. In this case, I'm pleased to introduce tonight Susan Totaro, our supervisor of K-12 instruction, focusing in elementary, as well as Jessica Sincata, the principal of High School South. And they were tasked with being the co-chairs of that particular committee. A leadership team was placed around them with respect to Barbara Gould, our Director of Counseling, Health, and Wellness, and Lee McDonald, our Assistant Superintendent for for Pupil Services and Planning. Sorry, Lee. Also, Anthony Jones, our coordinator for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Anthony is not with us tonight, you might notice, but Anthony had the birth of a new child. So Anthony is not here for great reasons. So we congratulate him and his family. So we have work that was done. And then what's happened with all of our other goals, very similarly, a committee was charged and to create a strategic action plan for the goal. And so the work tonight will be to talk about the process and to give a high-level overview of the action plan. So with that, I welcome Sue and Jessica and Barbara to the podium and thank them for coming for their presentation.
Good evening. On. Thank you for the opportunity to share the work of the Strategic Planning Committee. It is an absolute honor to co-chair this committee with Ms. Sincata and to be supported by Ms. Gould, Mr. Anthony Jones, Dr. Adderhold, Dr. Nathan, and Dr. McDonald. Our mission statement and introduction to the strategic goals clearly prioritize the intrinsic worth of each stakeholder and the power of embracing diversity. They acknowledge the impact all learners can have in creating a more peaceful, just, inclusive, and secure world. When we adopted the strategic goals, the committee noted the goals were dynamic. They could shift, they could change. The district would continue to review current practices and iterate as needed. The themes of equity, diversity, and inclusivity weave their way through the goals. The ethos of this district includes a deep and long commitment to creating a culture of belonging that embraces each unique learner. Before legislation required it, we took steps to address representation and resources. We created space for student voice and included community members in conversations regarding anti-bias work, inclusivity, cultural competence, and perspective taking. 8 years ago, we began our partnership with the Mercer County Consortium and Dr. Eddie Fergus to understand and address disproportionality. Our students participate in Day of Dialogue, and our culture and climate teams focus on the social and emotional well-being of students. In the spring of 2019, we held the Ed Camp for Equity and Inclusivity at High School South. It included a student forum. The message from the students who participated was clear. We needed to step back. We needed to listen. We needed to hear what they were saying. And we did. We listened to students. Because of the silence in our schools about disability, I've made it my mission to make the world a better place by increasing awareness about disability and shedding light on what it means to live the way I and other people with disabilities live. We listen to alumni. At that age, you don't want to stick out. So a coping mechanism, a protection or shield is to bob and weave between a group of your Black friends and other people, or just totally stick together. We listen to parents. The media shows negative portrayals of people's dressing, and our children see that. And we listen to our community members. All children deserve to know they belong. All children deserve to feel safe. This law will help ensure Asian Americans are represented in our great American story. And that's Dr. Connie O'Govern, founder of Make Us Visible New Jersey and a community member. What we know is that we've worked incredibly hard through the fall of 2019 and into the spring of 2020, but that it wasn't enough. We knew that we needed to continue to reflect on how to make the work of equity, diversity, and inclusivity visible, to be accountable, to be transparent. During the 2020-2021 school year, programming, curriculum revisions, and professional development focused on creating more equitable and inclusive spaces and outcomes, despite the pandemic. With the support of community groups like our PTAs and PTSAs, Interfaith Council, Make Us Visible, We See Color, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the African American Parent Support Group, High Tops, and the West Windsor-Plainsboro People of Color Advocacy, we began to formalize the beginnings of a plan. We were and are driven by our core understandings as educators. When decision-making at all levels reflects a deep commitment to equity, diversity, and belonging, when we open the curriculum so that each student has access to rigorous learning experiences aligned to their strengths, when curricular and extracurricular programs support inclusion rather than exclusion, reflecting neurodiversity and physical diversity as strengths, when each student is visible in terms of resources and opportunities, regardless of their race, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, ability, religion, socioeconomic class, ethnicity, and national origin. We shift outcomes for all. Ultimately, while equity, diversity, and inclusivity were always part of the culture of this district, creating an equity goal actualized our commitment to systemic change that lives beyond us. Our hope is that the strategic plan makes this work visible. Given the world we live in, given the events of today. Our students deserve to walk into schools that make them feel safe, seen, and valued.
Thank you, Sue. I'd like to take the next few slides to walk you through the process that we use to go through strategic planning. So as Dr. Adderhold spoke about in the beginning and Sue spoke about just now, this work started long before the formalization of the equity goal. With that, in the winter and spring of 2021, we began to create structures so that equity isn't something that moves with one person throughout the district, but instead finds its way into all buildings and all departments. So if you'll look, in the winter and spring of 2021, after the goal was formalized by the Board of Education, Sue and I were named as co-chairs, and we worked with central office administration to identify committee co-chairs that further created a robust team. With this team, we collected data, we crafted a draft vision of where this goal could go, and we began our research. Excuse me. The first step was discussing how to break down equity, because for years we believed, as we still do, that equity is a part of all decisions that we make and all of our previous goals, goal 1, 2, and 3, whole child, every child, global child. But we also didn't want equity to be lost within those goals, and that's why goal 4 stands alone as well. With that, we talked about the facets of this equity goal and decided upon board policy and practice, curriculum and instruction, programs, and professional development as the buckets, shall we say, in which we will begin to tackle the enormity of equity. With that, we named co-chairs for each one of these committees. Gerard Dalton and Lamont Thomas are our co-chairs for board policy and practice. Maureen Cook and Dr. Melissa Pearson are co-chairs for curriculum and instruction. Professional development is led by Barbara Gould and Jeff Santoro, and programs by Paul Hamnett and Sukhpreet Singh. Those co-chairs worked with the rest of our administrative committee to draft committee goals so that we could create a vision going into the school year. So throughout the summer, we worked together to create these goals for which the rest of our action plan would support. If you look at these, I'm not going to read these word for word just now because we're going to break them down further a little bit later in the presentation. But I would like to note the verbiage that's used in each of these. The first part of the statement talks about what we're going to do. The second part of the statement talks about why we want to do it. So if we look at curriculum and instruction, just for example, we're going to critically evaluate, take action, and make visible. And then it talks about all of the pieces and parts that we're going to make that happen. Like I said, we'll discuss these a little bit later in the presentation and break them down even further. So ending with summer 2021, we walked away with those goals from each committee. We met with our district administrative team, and we formed the other groups who were not directly involved in the equity goal, because as it was a large administrative team, we're spread throughout all of our strategic goals. We also began the idea of our stakeholder matrix. It's one thing for administrators to make goals and create a vision, but without the input and feedback, the perspective of our students, staff, community members, and alumni, we're not going to see the full picture. So with that, we created our stakeholder team and structure of meetings. We decided our district stakeholders would encompass all those I just listed, starting with our students. We have student representation from middle schools and high schools, our alumni representation, parent representation, and we understand that parents come with not only their parental lens, but also organizations that they might belong to, such as we named the African American Parent Support Group or Make Us Visible New Jersey. So they're wearing both of those hats when they come to our district stakeholder meetings. We have 2 representatives from every one of our 10 buildings for faculty representatives, as well as our administrative representatives. For the purpose of our stakeholder meetings, we wanted to give them the goal so that they could dive into what our equity goal is, as well as the goals of each of the committees as an overview and a vision of where we're going to go. And then we begin to break down the process and the purpose of strategic planning, which is to create a feedback loop where we can see draft ideas of how to implement this vision, taking in that feedback, making modifications and accommodations and, to that document, and again, sending it through that feedback loop so that we have an iterative process to make sure everyone can see themselves in this plan. We structured our meetings that we've had this year with the entire team where at the opening, they received an overview of the entire draft plan. Then they self-selected into whichever committee they felt most passionate about. Where the next meeting, they worked to do a deep dive within that content. And all of this was set up around a strategic plan template that's been used previously by the district, where we look at strategies and actions that support each one of those committee goals. So now, as we're coming to a close of this school year, over the past 2 semesters, we've met regularly with central office administration to make sure they're kept in the loop of what all of our in-between meetings are, because the stakeholder meetings have met will meet 3 times throughout the year. In between those, building teams are meeting with their building equity teams. And our supervisory team are meeting to look at curriculum and instruction. And we need to make sure that all of that is transparent information. We've done a gap analysis on our feedback loop to find out whose voices are we missing, to make sure that we then reach out to ensure that those voices are heard. And from that process, we have created our equity strategic plan.
Thank you, Jessica. During the creation of the action plan, each committee met a number of times in order to create a comprehensive and dynamic plan. The action plan for each committee is organized, as Jessica mentioned, into 2 parts. We have the strategy, and we also have activities to support those strategies. The first committee I'd like to share with you a little bit more about is the Board Policy and Practices Committee. So for the purpose of this committee, it was under the leadership of Gerard Dalton, principal of Millstone River School, and Lamont Thomas, the principal of Grover Middle School. They took a look at and really wanted to consider both policies and practices. And in thinking about policies, they define those as the board policies or regulations that are adopted that districts must follow. And then thinking about practices as ways in which policies are interpreted and everyday experiences and everyday procedures that are in place for our students. So here are the committee members that participated in the process of creating and providing feedback on the action plan. As I mentioned, the 2 committee chairs, Gerard Dalton, Lamont Thomas, and then we had representation from the administrative team, alumni, community members, parents, students, and teachers. As the committee met, they discussed the specific goal that they wanted to implement, and the goal reads as such. Policies and procedures will reflect directly and indirectly equity-based principles and demonstrate a commitment to inclusivity, fostering belonging and equitable outcomes for each student. As I mentioned, the actual action plan, here's an example of that, is organized into both strategies and activities to support those strategies. And you'll notice that some strategies have one activity and others might have a number of different activities that support that specific strategy. Although the action plan hasn't completely been adopted yet, the equity, diversity, and inclusivity work, as mentioned before, started long ago and has continued through this process. And here's one example of how this work might look that has been adopted by High School South. So this was an activity from the strategy that High School South students, as part of the Culture and Climate team, which is comprised of students and staff members, created a student-made handbook to be shared with faculty that gave numerous topics that students wanted teachers to know about, and specifically focused on creating a positive school community and school culture, and ways in which teachers and staff members could do that. And so this was one way that is an example of a practice that students had a part in and a voice in which they were able to really impact the culture at South. Another strategy that was included in the Policy and Practices Action Plan is to recommend appropriate professional development for administration, staff, and community. And one activity that would support that would be to develop and add equity conversations in all staff meetings. And here's an example of Anthony Jones, the district coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, leading a professional development experience for teachers where they were examining the equity goal and dissecting it in order to identify its parts, their own perspectives that they bring into the work, and how they are involved in moving the work forward. Similarly, the Professional Development Committee met frequently to revise and to create a goal and an action plan to support that goal. The co-chairs of that committee were Jeff Santoro, as mentioned earlier, and myself. We also had committee members from representation from the Board of Education, parents, teachers, other administrators in the district, students, and other staff members. After much discussion and feedback, the Professional Development Committee adopted the following goal: to provide targeted and differentiated and responsive professional development to ensure that each student, staff, and community member are welcomed, valued, respected, and celebrated. The Professional Development Committee organized its activities and strategies similarly to the other committees, but they felt that it was really important to think about the strategies in 3 buckets. The first bucket would be providing professional development that was targeted to all staff members. These professional development experiences would be consistent across the district for all staff pre-K through 12. And as mentioned earlier, the work has already started. So for example, this year we had numerous faculty meetings that were designed by the equity team that were then staff members were engaged in those throughout all 10 buildings and had consistent and common experiences. So that was the first bucket, to provide professional development that was targeted to all staff members. The second bucket would focus on professional development for groups of staff members. So an example of that would be grade level teams this year met and discussed ways in which they could utilize more inclusive texts in all classrooms and utilize those to support their curriculum. And then the third bucket would focus on differentiated professional development that would really address the needs of individual staff members, because as we know, in doing this work, everyone's journey with diversity, equity, and inclusivity looks differently, and providing choice to staff members and really meeting them where they are on their journey helps to support moving the work forward. As seen on this slide and mentioned, one of the strategies of the Professional Development Committee that was included in their action plan was to provide targeted PD for specific groups. And one activity to support that would be to engage administration in ongoing professional development. And here's an example of our administrative team meeting around and thinking about belief work related to the equity goal and working in collaboration and partnership to dissect the goal and to think about how it impacts their line of work. Another strategy that was included in the Professional Development Action Plan was to leverage staff and community partnerships in order to promote and deepen belief work around inclusivity. And an example of that would be to utilize community input and student voice in designing professional development. And here's a great example of how that work has already been realized and has been ongoing. This is a partnership between Janet Hogg. She's the Executive Director of National Alliance on Mental Illness. And you can see Janet here presenting a webinar with our Student Assistance Counselor from High School South and a High School South student. And together they're talking about mental health and how it relates to equity. And this particular webinar was then shared with the entire High School South community of students and staff members. And now I'll turn it over to Sue to talk a little bit about curriculum and instruction.
So the Curriculum and Instruction Committee is led by Dr. Melissa Pearson, who was actually hooded this past weekend at the University of Pennsylvania. Congratulations to her. And Maureen Cook, Ms. Maureen Cook, the assistant principal at Wyckoff, and includes students, community members, administrators, teachers, and Dr. Nathan, our assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, sits on this team. Like the Professional Development Committee, the Curriculum and Instruction Committee also took 3 buckets to look at this goal. Their goal is to critically evaluate, take action to ensure, and make visible curriculum, resources, pedagogy, and practices that create equitable and inclusive learning spaces for each student. When we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about those choices that a teacher makes, both within the planning of instruction, the assessment, and the actual teaching. Just one of the many activities that the C&I team has worked to implement is the identification of student materials that represent and affirm the diverse identities of our student population, while also providing opportunities to explore and represent perspectives beyond their own experiences. Let me make clear, as always, with any text that we choose for language arts, kindergarten through 12th grade, the goal is to teach the skills, knowledge, and dispositions represented in the New Jersey Learning Standards. For example, a 5th grade standard notes students will compare, contrast, and reflect on the treatment of similar themes, topics, and patterns of events in stories, myths, and traditional literature from different cultures. The text we choose to address these standards allow students to see themselves and each other. They provide windows and mirrors. Perspective taking is a critical life skill in combating hate and bias. One example that we wanted to share with you was The Proudest Blue. This is a text that was adopted at the elementary level, and it is a beautiful book about a young girl, and she is starting to wear her hijab. She is so, and why my son would be calling me, because he knows what I'm doing. She is so incredibly proud in this book of wearing her hijab. We had a parent contact us to let us know the impact that this text had on her daughter. It was the first time she had seen herself represented in that way in a text. That is what we want to happen. We want for all of our students to see themselves represented in the texts that are in front of them. Their families, their social identities, all of them. In addition, the plan specifically includes an iterative review of instructional programming to remove barriers and disrupt inequities. Using student data, we continue to make sure instructional practices support equitable access and outcomes. In thinking about the shifts in mathematics programming that Dr. Pearson was a major part of with Andrea Bean, we are already seeing a correlation to increased access and outcomes in regards to gender. This is the type of thing that an equity plan does. It allows you to put systems and structures in place so that all of our students have access to what it is they need. In addition to that, specific programming for our students is also addressed through the physical spaces, as evidenced by the students here. It's looking at what it is we can do differently. It's growing and changing and learning. It is not something that once we adopt this plan we'll be done doing. That's something that we know very well, but we also know that we are incredibly committed to continuing to learn through this process. There's also an emphasis on the aforementioned goal of communicating curriculum updates that address the equity goal, including highlighting inclusive practices involved in teaching and learning. And these are some of the things that we'll do through our professional development, through our staff meetings, and so on.
And the fourth committee is programs. Our co-chairs for this committee were Mr. Paul Hamnet and Ms. Sukhpreet Singh, both assistant principals at Community Middle School. You can see we had administrators, parent and community members, and teachers on this committee. I would like to take note that there is not a student, well, there was, but that student has self-selected to another committee because of a passion and an interest. And so we wanted to honor that. And because we were already in the middle of the work, it just so happened. And I didn't want you to have a question about why there wasn't a student listed there. There'll be plenty of space in the next steps where we'll have lots of opportunity for student voice. So the goal for programs including but not limited to curricular and extracurricular activities, events, initiatives, and athletics will reflect the needs and interests of our community in order to create equitable and inclusive opportunities for each student. What we found when discussing programs is it became very fluid because of that curricular and extracurricular aspect. So this goal was written in order to encompass what could be in the future and what has happened over the past couple of years as we have made a lot of implementations thanks to our technology over the past couple of years. So as we dig a little deeper, we'll hope to reflect that in our strategies and activities. So one strategy I would like to highlight is develop partnerships between schools and community organizations, members, and alumni. With the creation of our coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusivity position, which Mr. Anthony Jones stepped into 2 years ago now, we have found that the connection to our alumni and any organization then that they are a part of has been incredibly strengthened. What we want to make sure of with this activity listed here, which is create a process to support community outreach, is that that type of connection doesn't come just with the person who's making the connection. What we've also seen in the West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District is we've seen movement from one building to another. When an administrative role specifically comes open, administrators move from building to building, from building administration into a supervisory role, or from a supervisory or a building administrative role into central office. We want to ensure that relationships with our community aren't based on that person, but have a structure to function even when people change positions, so that we don't lose connections when people change. So we're grateful that the coordinator position exists, and through that position, along with our building equity teams, we'll continue to create a process to support that outreach. Part of what you'll see here in this picture is an example on the left side. That is our AVID class, which is at both high schools. This is just one example from High School South, where connections with Mr. Jones and the AVID elective teachers brought in alumni to speak to our current students. On this page, a lot of our strategies talk about athletics, clubs and activities, and our activities then talk about some reflective practices to get some baseline data, especially after returning from a pandemic where the majority of our student population was virtual for a year and a half. We really need to set our baseline of what our involvement looks like so that then we can set clear goals into how to build our involvement and build our offerings so that we fully understand. But first, we must fully understand what our students and what our community want and are interested in. Some examples of this. On the top right, we have one of our esports teams. Esports were created a couple of years ago and sanctioned by NJSIAA. And on our lower right, we have our unified softball team. United softball team. We have 3 united athletic opportunities for our students between football, cheerleading, and softball. Because participation numbers were low in both schools, we came together to continue to provide opportunities for our students in those interested areas. So once again, we'll get that baseline data in order to ensure that we're still providing opportunities that we currently have, as well as possibly providing new opportunities. So that concludes the outlines of our structures and our strategies and activities within those 4 committees. Now what? That's always the next question, right? What are the next steps? So after this evening, tomorrow night we'll be meeting with our entire stakeholder team for the final time to celebrate the equity work within the district, as well as we'll complete a prioritization matrix with our stakeholder team, and then we'll do that with our district administrative team as well. That will give us an idea of where we need to start within this entire plan. We'll launch action committees that will look to, like I had referenced earlier, about other opportunities to become involved, because although that large stakeholder team doesn't necessarily come together, because now we'll know when and where to start, and then we'll ask for help, volunteers, and feedback within those specific areas and places. And of course, over this entire next step process, we need to plan for progress monitoring. Who will be in charge of that? What will that look like? How often will that happen? So those will be our next steps. I'm going to turn it back over to Sue Tutero to close us out this evening.
Again, I think we've learned as a country that words matter. Increasingly, we find ourselves in a world that negates and diminishes the undeniable right of our students to be seen as the unique and extraordinary individuals they are. Thank you for supporting us in creating a strategic plan that unapologetically acknowledges each individual's intrinsic worth through the goals outlined tonight, to celebrate their identities, to recognize their gifts, and include their stories. We truly appreciate the time that you gave us to do this tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much for that presentation. Are there any questions from the board? Oh, yeah, Louisa?
Sure. I know you've made a lot of changes in curriculum. Normally, when we change curriculum, there's a normal follow-up and review process amongst the faculty who taught the new curriculum. Can I assume that that's going to happen with all the curriculum changes you made as well?
Absolutely. We're following the same processes for curriculum as we always have. Dr. Nathan would be able to speak to that even more.
I know this is a job that is never done, okay? But if I was to say from like here to here, like how far do you guys feel we are? Because it was a little, I mean, you had examples of things and examples of strategies, but I didn't quite grasp, like there's 100 things on the list, we've done 72, there's 100 things on the list, we've done 12. Like where are we?
So this is the draft of the strategic plan. The thing that's a little bit different, I believe, and my co-people over here can add in, is that when we're looking at the work, we can't say we did it, check, we're done. So it's an iterative process. Strategic planning is always dynamic. It's never, they say do the 5-year plan and you're done. That's just not how it works. Dr. Adderhold can speak to that in terms of the goals that we already had. So how far are we in some things? We've done some things that we are extraordinarily proud of. But do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. And what I think will happen is as we get that work done, there'll be more to do. So for us, the real goal of this plan is to create the systems and the structures that perpetuate the iterative process, that continue to ask us to reflect, change course if needed, celebrate, and tackle the next problem.
Liz?
First of all, I just want to say thank you very much for this presentation, and I'm just amazed by the amount of work that's been undertaken already over the past couple of years, and it's such important work for everyone in our community. When I think of the DE&I type of approach, I always think about what you said, the sense of belonging and making sure that we feel connected and safe and as part of a community. My question had to do really with the engagement of the community, and I noted that you had mentioned that you're going to be launching some action committees, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So how is that process going to unfold, and how would people get involved if they wanted to?
So the next step will really be that prioritization matrix, and that'll tell you kind of to a little bit of where do we begin our next steps. Of course, it'll be continuation, but when, for example, Barbara used the student handbook that was the student-made teacher handbook, excuse me. One of the strategies and activities will be looking at our student handbooks, right, that come out of policy, but then the practices of how we interpret those handbooks. That could then have an action plan of getting student input at each of the secondary building levels where there are student handbooks, and then coming together to present that to the board. So it'll look really closely at what is the prioritization matrix, where are we going to begin, and then who is most fitting for those action committees, right? To make sure that we have student voice represented, and then parent and community input as well. I can't say that we would use the exact same process for everyone because of where the student voice would be most necessary. That's what we're really going to look for first. But because of that progress monitoring, we'll always be asking ourselves, whose perspective are we missing Are we missing a perspective? And how do we circle back for that feedback loop to make sure we're catching that if we did miss it the first time, that we're catching it the second time around. And of course, we're going to ask the people who are on that committee who needs to be here, who's not at the table.
I just wanted to also add that I noted that, there's mention of athletics and the different types of ways that you're trying to support children's interest in the different sports when there aren't enough members to field the team. And I think that's a great valuable direction to go through to help, give an outlet beyond just academics or certain kinds of extracurriculars. So I think thank you for including that as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I do.
Sure, Graham.
First, thank you for that presentation. It's clear that you've been well organized, and I'm glad that you recognize that in order to have a strong strategic planning, you're incorporating that feedback loop for that iterative process that you mentioned. One thing I thought was really creative that you mentioned was that example of the student-made teacher handbook at High School South. So I just wanted to clarify, was that already rolled out? And if so, do you have any details about how it was implemented and any feedback you've already received?
So that was created several years ago, prior to the board adopting the goal and all of that. How it has been implemented this year specifically, that I will speak to since this is my first year at High School South. We have one of our assistant principals, Ms. Emily Krevlane. She works with our new teachers, and we meet with the new teachers to High School South. We call it the meeting of the first, and we meet with them regularly on the first of everything, first day, first month, things like that, to keep a cohort together. Through a couple of those meetings, she used that handbook to drive the conversation, to dig in, let them see a little bit more of our student population, what our students think is important for our staff to know. So that's one way we've used that handbook and had it implemented this year with staff new to High School South.
If I could build on that, I think it's important, I think that's a good example of to show that the work's been ongoing, that predates the equity goal. So if we go back to the 15-16 school year, right? That 15-16 school year is the year in which we had a lot of big public conversations about, at the time, A&E mathematics. We were talking about social emotional learning. I had written a letter to the community in October of 15 that generated some conversation. And through that, there was a lot of work that had happened really, quite frankly, in the 13-14 school year, the 14-15 school year forward. Out of that work, we then started having data dialogue conversations as a county and our culture and climate teams through Dr. McDonald as the Director of Counseling, Health and Safety at the time, leading some of that work with our culture and climate teams. And so one of the counselors at South, working with a cohort of students on those culture and climate teams, then identified specific issues that the students wanted to talk about, and the way in which that they best felt that they could communicate something to the staff was to create a handbook, something that the staff could hear from student voice. And over a period of 2 years, really 2 school years, they generated that and then ultimately funded to publish, work to publish the handbook for students. So it's not just up online. Every staff member actually got a spiral-bound student handbook as well. So a real powerful way to include student voice and educating our staff around issues that were relevant to our students, from our students, written by our students.
Thank you for the response. With that background and history, it's clear that you value continuous improvement. Thanks.
Dana?
Okay, I wanted to also say thank you for all the work that you've done over the last at least 2 years now, helping everyone to understand different perspectives. And I think it's really important that we all learn that this is a path. We're trying to put students, families on a path to lifelong learning, appreciation of other cultures and perspectives. And this is, this is a really important goal and should be a goal for every, every district, I hope. because education is the key to breaking down stereotypes and making sure that people understand each other. And I just to comment, because I noticed a more south, sort of focus, and my children went to North or still go to North, so I just wanted to make sure that there's some, thinking about things on both sides of, both high schools and both programs. But again, I want to thank you all, and thank Anthony in his absence for all the, in his absence tonight, for all of his work with your committee.
One of the things, and then Barb wants to share a little bit about the handbook at High School North and the work that they're doing there, but one of the things that we were very intentional in doing was creating opportunities for the building leads, all of the teacher leaders, we have 20 of them, 2 for each of the buildings, meet with Jessica, Anthony, and I, and Barb, when she can be there, to talk about what's happening in their buildings. Because one of the things that we heard, part of that feedback loop, was that we need to see some consistency in what's happening. At the same time, we also heard each building has a culture. Each building reflects the students and the teachers and the community that are there, so we can't move lockstep together. So creating that opportunity for the teacher leads to come together, bounce ideas off of each other, share with each other. I mean, they are taking risks walking into some of these conversations. We're supporting them this summer with professional development around having difficult conversations. That's going to help to continue to create some consistency in practice that still reflects the culture of the building.
And sometimes a school might pilot a particular idea, such as the student handbook that was created. So South piloted that through the leadership of their student assistance counselor. But North is in the planning stages of creating their own handbook. So they also are going through a process and utilizing student voice to do that through their culture and climate team. It's taking a little bit longer because the students have many things they want to say, so they're trying to narrow down some of the topics and really consider the feedback from the students before proceeding to writing the handbook. So sometimes it happens at one school and maybe it was highlighted that way here, but another school might take it on the following year or the year after that.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Okay. So I actually just wanted to say thank you to all of you for all this work. I mean, it's been actually a pleasure and a privilege to be part of those stakeholder meetings. Just seeing how much collaboration, how many people are involved, how much collaboration there is, how much thought and work has gone into all those meetings, and how you came up with all of these different groups and the different strategies and activities. It has been really impressive to see how that all came together. I did want to just to ask and follow up on the next steps. So as far as what the board can expect to see, I know we were talking about the 4 different groupings, and then you had the strategies and activities, and what we saw on the screen above is just a sampling of how much there is. So we can expect to see like the completed work at some point, and then at that point we'll get a good picture of everything that's been done, and then what at some point will need to be prioritized, correct?
Absolutely. Dr. Adderhold, do you want to speak to that?
I can. So, thank you. So it's a great question. So, I mean, the next step is, yeah, thank you, sir. We know we have to, we have another stakeholder meeting tomorrow in this room. So there'll be some sharing of the works that's happened, and then there'll be an opportunity for the building-based teams to also showcase some of the work that they want to. Then we're going to have to go through the prioritization matrix that Jessica and Sue and Barbara spoke about. And that's no different than something that we would do if we did a program review, right? So we do a program review, and then you get external feedback, internal feedback, and then you get all these plans, and then you have to do some kind of implementation plan then, right? And so in some kind of prioritization, it's a little bit different in strategic planning work because there's not an external consultant, so to speak, in this. But there are 4 different buckets to look at. and across 10 buildings and a district that don't necessarily all have staffing or funding or professional development training. So it's one thing to write about doing training. It's another thing to fund it and staff it, and then to figure out like who can go to what workshops and actually which buildings are at which level. And with every strategic plan goal that we've seen is, yeah, you have a plan, and then you go to implement it, and those that wrote it aren't necessarily always the implementers, and the implementers get to it and start saying, wait a second, we're not at the same place here at all the 3K, at the 4K, pre-K2, K3, K2 schools, right? We need to look at this and go, okay, and then 3.5 and 4.5. We have to look at this and say, okay, then how do we actually do this? And then how do we differentiate training? So there's a whole iterative process that we're going to need to go through over the next couple of weeks and months, well through the summer till we get to the implementation. What we know is this will be a huge part of our administrative retreat in August. It'll be a component of our opening faculty meetings. It will be a component of our rollout with our new teacher orientations. And then we'll just keep building. One of the things that we do to stay connected is every month we have our 4 strategic goal chairs meeting with central office administration and what we call a cross-pollinator team. So a couple administrators that are in different roles throughout the district, our director of special education, our director of technology, elementary representation, middle school representation, high school representation, come together to sort of review and talk through strategic next steps. And so we build and plan professional development opportunities there. We plan the rollout and the training of that professional development, and we plan out, essentially we planned out a year process. But anyone who knows anything about planning something in a school district for a year knows you can probably get 3 to 4 months out, and then you have to pause and reevaluate. Like January had to look different because of the Omicron surge, right? We had to look complete, everything had to change, and then we had to reevaluate and pause. And then, but you get a sense, like, so there's certain systemic trainings that will go out, and then there's certain things that will be prioritized and individualized. So the board will hear this feedback most likely through future presentations, but also at the committee level. And you'll hear about it in pockets. Like when we talk about athletics and opportunity, there's at least one other sport that we're looking at for a united program right now. So you'll hear about that in a board resolution that's going to be separate and apart from an equity presentation. But we know that but it speaks to equity and access and opportunity. So it will show itself in different ways. Long answer for an easier question, sorry.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Haviland. All right, and thank you again so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just say, I mean, to Barbara and to Anthony, who's not here tonight, but and to Sue and Jessica in particular, and then the leadership team that's behind it and all those individuals working on it, there's been so many meetings. I mean, it's just above and beyond their commitment to their existing roles and all the work that they're doing. If I think about just like the last week, we've had our goal lead meetings. We've had our 2 committee presentations. We've had a PTA, PTSA presentation. We have all the planning to be prepared for all the meetings and the presentations. We had the presentation tonight and a presentation tomorrow. No less than 7 meetings that I can think of that Sue and Jessica in particular and Barbara were at to be prepared for not only tonight, but the last week. It's just a tremendous culmination of so much work. I can't thank you both enough, and Barbara, for all the work that you've done, and then all those that are on the committees or co-chairs. An area we didn't speak about tonight, but I think is really important just to recognize is, besides all this other work, there's a whole staffing element, and Charity's been leading that work with CJ Pride at the state level, but within the county level, but also in WWP. The last 2 years, we've done presentations in October, November time period where Charity's talked about our staffing ratios and the concerted efforts we're making about our hiring practices and whatnot. So the equity work is very much alive in WWP. Our strategic goals are very much alive in WWP. So something I think we're doing really well, but very different than other places. Through the pandemic, we've found a way to accelerate and put a more intentional focus on our goals and on our work. And we haven't just said they're complete, they're up on the website. They're very much actively part of all of our conversations. So that's a credit to our leadership and all the thought that's done throughout our leadership ranks, and I thank the team for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adhome. All right, so we're now going to move to the first opportunity for public comments. The board invites thoughts and reactions on agenda items and items of concern from members of our community who are present. Each participant is asked to give his or her name and address prior to making a statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes in accordance with Board Policy 0167. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. This public comment period shall be limited to 60 minutes. Are there any public comments? Come on.
Hi, I'm Zen Zaidi. I'm a sophomore at High School South, and I'm the vice president of High School South's Muslim Student Association.
Hi, my name is Sarah Ramani. I'm a senior at High School South, and I am the president of the Muslim Student Association at South.
Hi, my name is Summer Ramani, and I'm a sophomore at High School South, and I am the secretary of South's Muslim Student Association.
So I wanted to start by talking about Eid. I know for a fact that this is a topic that's come up at one of these meetings before. So on May 2nd, which was our Eid, I went to school. I had a geometry test first period. I took that test. I had to leave to go say my Eid prayers, which is a yearly thing. And then I had to come back to school because I had a chemistry test as well. Miss Hanos at the attendance office asked me why I was leaving and then coming back, and it was because we didn't have off. And so it was an inconvenience, to say the least, on a day that shouldn't have been so inconvenient. It is a day for Muslims, which is a large and growing community in our district, to have a day where they get to spend time with their family. We did have off, however, that was on May 3rd, not May 2nd, so it was the wrong day. And I was speaking with Mr. Jones at an event that we had at our local mosque, and it turns out that the district hadn't recognized Eid at all, which was appalling because, again, of our growing and large Muslim community at all schools throughout the district. So to get to the point, I, on behalf of the Muslim Student Association, as well as the Muslim community at High School South, are requesting to have off on Eid, which is, albeit a changing holiday, it's changing in nature because we follow the lunar calendar. However, I feel as though those dates are summed up pretty well on a Google search well before, and I feel as though some flexibility as well as some recognition for a large Muslim community in the district would be greatly appreciated and would match up well with our goal for plan for the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
My name is Edward Simon Cruz, address 5 Sullivan Street, Plainsboro. In April 2020, about a month into the lockdown, there was talk about a racist incident that occurred on social media. May 2020, George Floyd gets killed. June 2020, racial justice protests emerge across the country, and our country has the most intense conversations on systemic racism that it's had in, well, years, if not decades. And all of that work has intensified the work that we've already been doing in this district surrounding equity, and I wanted to recognize that, the work that Ms. Nkata and Mr. Taro mentioned, people like Mr. Jones, who are who in his 2 years here has been a great inspiration to people like me, both from my perspective as a student and from my perspective as initially a member and now as one of the main chairs of the WWP POC advocacy. And looking at the work of the equity team and of the schools around the district, things like the Student-Made Teacher Handbook, the Equity Week at South, the revisions to social studies curricula, the inclusion of texts that better represent the perspectives that are integral to, but have long been excluded from our teachings of American history. All of those have been an inspiration and a reminder that, as multiple people here have pointed out tonight, both sitting behind me and in front of me, that this work is ongoing, it's not going to stop, it cannot stop, and it's not going to stop. And looking at all of this from my role as a student, I have faith that what I'm going to say will come to fruition. But the reminder is still worth giving, that as we move into these next steps, which are somewhat broadly defined at the moment, but that I trust will become more concrete over the summer, over the next few months, as the equity team starts drafting up its drafting up its action committees, I believe that the role of students should be prioritized in all of this. And I believe that everyone that here likely already agrees with this. And I'm not saying this to chastise anyone. I'm saying this because I know that there's much that we agree on. And I know that this work, again, will continue. But it's best if that work continues together. Because as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the moral arc of the universe will bend toward justice, but it will bend toward justice if we work to make sure it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hi, my name is Kathleen Moriarty. I live at 8 Taunton Court in West Windsor. I do represent the Special Education PTSA as a president, but I am speaking on my own beliefs, as well as some of the experiences as being president and involved with the PTSA for over a decade. This is wonderful. DEI should always have been part of the goals of the district. But let's not forget that equity and inclusion is sometimes required by law. And the special education, our special needs families are quite aware of that. And I think the school is as well through the special services, regulation, and policies that need to be followed. We were a little bit confused when we saw the presentation because we saw that some PTSAs were involved, AAPSG, other groups that we're usually involved with, but we were not contacted to even give any feedback. We hope we will be included in the future, but we think we could have provided some really valuable comments, less broad, very defined, because we're going through this right now. We go through it all the time. Our program review reflects a lot of those issues and needs that we have, a lot of it underpinning and related to DEI. So we're hoping, again, that we'll be a part of it. We are very concerned that us not being a part of it may have prevented or at least had a reconsideration of the proposal that was provided to the board at the end of March. We believe that if DEI was also infused in that overall discussion, that perhaps least restrictive environment, which is a law and a rule, would be something that would have been considered, and we would have had less controversy over a proposal that many families were wondering how was this being proposed, because it did appear in conflict with DEI. So like a program review, we hope that the implementation phase may include community members and a PTSA that has been here for a very long time, to be able to provide some very concrete and very detailed goals. And we hope that the work will continue and will improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay. So with that, we'll close the first opportunity for public comments. Dr. Adholt, do you have some comments?
Well, just to our 4 students, thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for your presentation and for making public comment. With respect to Eid, I appreciate the comments, and we became aware of the conflict too late to do anything about it. So I appreciate your comments tonight. As the gentleman said, Eid can shift on the lunar calendar. And so when we set the board calendar 2 years in advance, at the time, the Department of Education date was Tuesday, May 3rd. But as, 2 years later, so we're going to have to look at our process, because there was an intentionality to honor Eid in the building of the calendar. And if I remember correctly, that's the first year that Eid was represented on our district calendar. But again, the calendar, the date can shift, and the department, it's not the Department of Ed, it's New Jersey Department, it's at the state level, Mark, correct, that issues it?
The New Jersey Department of Education actually publishes a list of recognized religious
Thank you.
holidays for all religions. And
I couldn't
they
remember
set
which
the
agency.
master-
Okay.
They set the master calendars, for lack of a better term.
And the master calendar doesn't mean that you have to provide all those dates off, but they set a date so that there's agreement and commonality of the dates, right? And so on the published list for that year, they then issued a revision in sometime in April, and it became too late on our board agenda timeline because a school calendar can only be modified by the Board of Education. So unfortunately, the date was incorrect, and there's no malintent, and I hope the students understand that. But going forward, we're going to have to continually look back at the calendar to look at that May date. Now, one of the things we'll also have to just be mindful of is the set district testing calendar that doesn't trump Eid, but we'll have to be mindful of how that runs into some of the just logistics of the mechanism of the district. Now, remember, you can't necessarily set a calendar based on any particular holiday. You can based on staffing considerations. And so, again, the comment is well received and well taken, and just something that we're going to have to be mindful of as a Board of Education. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move to committee reports. We'll have the Administration and Facilities Committee report first. Dana?
Hello, good evening. The Admin and Facilities Committee met on May 16th. Is this working? Yes. Okay. Members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity team met with the committee to get feedback on a strategic plan draft. A follow-up presentation will be made today at the May 24th Board of Education meeting. The district is also celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage and Jewish American Heritage Month throughout the month of May with various activities and events. Next, the committee discussed several policies that we recommend for a first reading at tonight's meeting. They are P1122, benefits covering non-affiliated administrative employees. Another one called Title I district-wide parent and family engagement. Another Title I school parent and family engagement. Student intervention and referral services, maintenance and repair, facilities maintenance, repair, scheduling and accounting, and use of school facilities. We also reviewed several other policies and regulations and recommend them for second reading and approval at tonight's meeting. That is one on high school graduation, anti-hazing, bias crimes and bias-related acts, and then the regulation for bias crimes and bias-related acts. The committee also recommended a review of the regulation for use of school facilities, which was the COVID addendum, R7510.01, and we recommend its abolishment at tonight's meeting. Committee reviewed the contract for the 2022-2023 contract for the advancement via individual determination, the AVID program, which is offered at both High School North and South, which is actually referenced in your presentation earlier tonight. The district will be issuing a request for quote, an RFQ, to secure a school physician for the 2022-2023 school year, as the current physician is retiring. And the committee recognizes and thanks Dr. Jerry Raymond for his many years of service to the district. Dr. McDonald provided a photographic tour of the construction progress at High School South and High School North, Community Middle School, and Wyckoff Elementary School. Highlights included the dance studios at both high schools, a renovated band room and new science classrooms at CMS, and new kindergarten classrooms and music room at Wyckoff. Registration for fall high school sports is now open. Both High School North and South recently honored college-bound student athletes from the class of 2022 with a signing day ceremony. The district continues to update outdated language and current job descriptions, and the committee reviewed descriptions for many positions, and I will not repeat all of them because it's a lot. And we recommend that, and we spent a great deal of time looking at them. The committee recommends the revised job descriptions for tonight's meeting, and we will next meet on June 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Are there any questions from board members? Okay. Okay, we'll have the curriculum committee report next from Pooja.
Good evening. The curriculum committee met on May 17th to discuss 6 agenda items. The first item, the committee previewed the draft equity strategic goal presentation. Sue Totaro, Jessica Sincata, and Barbara Gould presented it at the beginning of our meeting, and questions and feedback were provided to the team by the committee members. The second agenda item, the committee recommends approval to authorize the third year of a 5-year agreement with Educational Services Commission of New Jersey to provide administration of non-public funds for non-public school students within the district in accordance with the State Board of Education guidelines as required. The third item on the agenda, the committee recommends approval of the textbook adoptions for 4 courses for forensic sciences, the book Forensic Science 3rd edition, Fundamentals and Investigations, for physics honors, college physics, a strategic approach, for physics, experience physics, for geometry, reveal geometry. The fourth item the committee reviewed, we recommended approval for the disposal of instructional materials in accordance with R7300.1 at Maurice Hawk, Dutch Neck, Millstone River, Town Center, Village School, Wyckoff. The fifth item that the committee recommends approval for is a professional development item where we recommend 1 AP literature teacher to attend an APSI at Northwestern University virtually, and 1 high school robotics teacher to attend Carnegie Mellon Robotics Academy training in Pittsburgh. The final item that we discussed and recommend approval for involves technology contracts. 1 technology contract was for the annual service renewal with Intrado Interactive Services Corporation to provide school messenger web hosting services and other services. 1 contract was to renew an agreement with MyVRSpot for cable station closed captioning services for the 22-23 school year. 1 contract was to approve a 1-year agreement with Genesis Educational Services to provide system maintenance and other services. Another was to approve a 1-year agreement with Gaggle Safety Management for Google to provide alert monitoring software. Another one was to approve a one-year agreement with EMS Link Inc. to provide registration gateway premium platform for student registration. And one was for a one-year agreement with Raptor Technologies to provide eyes on the door software and support. And the last contract was a renewal of an annual contract with Millennium Communications for Genetech for building, door, and other services. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. Any questions from board members? Okay, our last committee report will be from the Finance Committee.
Okay, the Finance Committee met on Tuesday, May 17th. The committee reviewed the monthly financial reports along with agenda items for today's meeting. This included the 22-23 professional service rate renewals, the transfer of capital project interest income, petty cash fund amounts, disposal of some old equipment, and the use of cooperative pricing for refinishing gym floors and several travel requests. The agenda also includes the request for approval to use state contract vendors and participate in joint purchasing agreements, cooperative purchasing agreements, and shared services agreements for the next school year. Next, staff shared information regarding referendum projects. Bids are prepared to be advertised for Phase 1 of the Media Center renovations, which includes Dutch Neck and Millstone River. For High School North and Millstone River HVAC project, the equipment is being commissioned, staff trained, and we are working on the punch list. Work on the High School North Dance Studio is all but complete. However, the installation of the most important part of the dance studio, the floor, is delayed due to a delay in the rooftop HVAC unit delivery. The floor cannot be installed until the room's air conditioning is properly for installation. The documents for the High School North Culinary Arts Lab and Media Center are being prepared and scheduled for bid at the end of this school year. At South, both wings are at substantial completion and work is underway on the punch list. The last furniture delivery has been made and final touches on any outstanding work is being completed in the Block A addition. In Block B, final code inspections are complete, security camera installation is coming to completion, and there are a few punch list items being addressed. At Community, the band and practice room lights have been installed and fire alarm installation is occurring. In addition, acoustic wall panels were installed, HVAC ductwork installation is being finalized, and vinyl composite tile flooring is being installed. In the workshop engineering rooms and the science labs, the floors have been saw cut, masonry has been removed, and the required plumbing and electric have been installed. Once the area is inspected, the concrete will be poured for the flooring. At Wyckoff, masons are erecting the block walls, plumbers are installing roof drains and ventilation stacks, and electricians are installing conduit for the new electrical service. Staff updated the committee on the Energy Savings Improvement Program. At Community, the gas sub-meters for the expansion part of the building still need to be installed. The sub-meters are needed for the energy rebates. Controllers for the additional HVAC approved last month have been ordered. The chiller at Town Center is running with control and balancing work starting. The new HVAC equipment for the Dutch Neck office has been installed and is running. Staff also updated the committee on the food service program. For April, the program averaged 5,900 lunches per day and 520 breakfasts per day. The committee discussed lunch prices, which must be increased this year due to inflation and cost increases. WWP meal prices are below the other districts in the county. It was determined that the lesser increase would be requested for approval. The proposed lunch prices for the 22-23 year are included on the board meeting agenda. For transportation, several routes went out to bid. Some came in at higher than expected amounts, and the district is taking price increases into consideration and looking into different pricing options. Staff provided a health and safety update. COVID cases are rising in our community. The district has been in consultation with local and county health officials, and at this time, they are not recommending mandatory masking. Administration continues to monitor this situation. Regarding the 22-23 budget, the committee discussed potential stressors on the approved budget, mostly due to inflation and gas price increases. There was no other business discussed. The committee is next meeting on Tuesday, June 7th.
Thank you, Louisa. Any questions from board members? Okay. All right, we're now going to move to the voting portion of our meeting. Can I have a motion for administration items 1 through 10? Dana and Liz, any questions or comments? Chris?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Bonso.
Yes.
Ms. Geniera?
Yes.
Ms. Ho?
Yes, but I'm abstaining on number 4.
Okay, number 4. Ms. Krug?
Yes.
Ms. Maliga?
She's not here.
Oh, true statement. Thank you very much. And next we have Ms. Shetty,
Yes.
Ms. Zovich,
Yes.
Ms. McEwen,
Yes, but abstaining from number 1.
number 1. Okay, and Ms. Juliana.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, can I have a motion on curriculum items 1 through 4, Pooja and Graylin? Any questions or comments? Chris?
All right, we'll start with Ms. Cheniera.
Yes.
Ms. Ho,
Yes.
Ms. Krug,
Yes.
Ms. Shetty,
Yes.
Ms. Zovich,
Yes.
Ms. Bonsall,
Yes.
Ms. McEwen,
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes. Okay, can I have a motion on finance items 1 through 21, plus the blue addendum, Louisa and Shweta? Any questions or comments? Chris?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Ho,
Yes.
Ms. Krug,
Yes.
Ms. Shetty,
Yes.
Ms. Zovich,
Yes.
Ms. Bonsall,
Yes.
Ms. Cheniera,
Yes.
Ms. McEwen,
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes. Can I have a motion for personnel items 1 through 4, plus the green and pink addenda? We have Robin and Dana. Any questions or comments? Okay, Chris?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Krug,
Yes.
Ms. Shetty,
Yes.
Ms. Zovich,
Yes.
Ms. Bonsall,
Yes.
Ms. Cheniera,
Yes.
Ms. Ho,
Yes.
Ms. McEwen,
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes. And on our personnel addenda, we just voted on a retirement, so the retirement of Janice Elliott. She's a special education teacher retiring after 20 years in the district, so we want to thank her for all of your years to our district and our students, and we wish you very well on your retirement, so thank you very much. Okay. Now move to approval of our minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for our April 26th closed session and our May 10th meeting? Liz and Pooja? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay. Any board liaison reports?
I have one.
Graylin?
Hi, good evening, everyone. The WWP Education Foundation Board met on Monday, May 16th. Among the topics of discussion was the STAR campaign to honor teachers and staff across the district. It has so far raised over $12,000. The STAR campaign does continue to accept requests through June 10th, and certificates will be given to recipients by June 15th. The Youth Committee hosted a successful alumni panel event. They received lots of positive feedback, including how well organized it was and how much guidance was shared. The Youth Committee has also been busy with other fundraisers. Their most recent restaurant of the month was Halal Guys. They also ran a campaign to benefit Ukrainian children, which is still open for contributions. All proceeds go directly to the Save a Child charity organization. Last but not least, the board discussed the upcoming virtual innovation fair and WWP's Got Talent show on June 4th. So far, 12 presenters are confirmed and include Frank O'Brien from NASA, the Rutgers Museum, Singapore Math, Code Ninjas, Maker Ambassadors, Scouts FLL or First Lego League, Princeton ACS or American Chemical Society, and Girls in Coding. The cost is only $5 per family. Of course, the Education Foundation gladly accepts additional donations if you so desire. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, June 8th.
Thank you, Graylin. Any other liaison reports?
It may not necessarily be liaison, but yesterday I had attended the National Honor Society induction ceremony at High School South, and I just wanted to say that it was really a wonderful ceremony and so well organized, and it just gave the opportunity for parents who are not so familiar with such ceremonies and the significance, and I think it was a very special way to recognize the students for all their hard work. So very much thank you to the High School South.
Thanks, Liz. Any other liaison reports? Okay. Any new business? Okay, that takes us to the second opportunity for public comments. The board invites comments from members of our community who are present. Each participant is asked to give his or her name and address prior to making a statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes in accordance with Board Policy 0167. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. This public comment period shall be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any public comments? Okay. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the second opportunity for public comment. We will now need to recess back into.
Before you do.
Oh, sure.
Just wanted to make a couple real brief comments. One, I wanted to recognize Emily Kreveling on the agenda this evening. She was just named the Supervisor of Language Arts in replacing Kathy Riley, who's retiring from the district after 10 years of service. Emily currently is the Assistant Principal at High School South. Before coming to us at South, she was an instructional coach. She was a language arts teacher. She was a supervisor of English. She was an assistant principal of language arts. So she comes to us with a great background in language arts, and she's very excited to move to this new capacity. What that does do, though, is we did post an anticipated assistant principal for High School South on Friday. So Jessica will have the opportunity to select a new assistant principal. So we'll have yet another vacancy at the administrative level. Also wanted to just remind everyone that the June 7th, on the original published list of board dates, it was June 7th. That happens to be the same day as the public elections for the primary. So we did change the board date to June 14th. That's been publicly notified, that's been run in the papers, that's been on our website. But again, just for the good of the public that might be watching, the 9 people, June 14th is the next board meeting. The committee meetings are on June 7th. Again, primaries are on June 7th. And then, just because I think we should, come back to what we're up against. Tomorrow, our educators are going to step into classrooms and be in front of students filled with their own angst and heartbreak about what's unfolding in Texas, as that number is now increased from 14 to 21, 18 children, 3 adults, 1 fourth grade teacher amongst the named, as well as over 50 wounded. So, that is something that I just ask our community to have some grace with our staff tomorrow as they step into classrooms and take care of their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adderholm. Okay, so we will now need to recess into closed executive session, so I will read the statement. Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act authorizes boards of education to meet in executive session under certain circumstances. Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act requires the board to adopt a resolution at a public meeting to go into private session. Now therefore be it resolved by the West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District Board of Education that it is necessary to meet in executive session to discuss certain items involving the superintendent evaluation. Be it further resolved that any discussion held by the board, which need not remain confidential, will be made public as soon as feasible. The minutes of the executive session will not be disclosed until the need for confidentiality no longer exists. Be it further resolved that the board will not return to open session to conduct business at the conclusion of the executive session. Can I then have a motion to adjourn to closed session? Robin and Louisa, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Again, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.